Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Mickie Kennedy. He believes that with some effort and a little money, the possibilities are endless. He is an expert at helping small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility and credibility, both very important things. Mickie founded eReleases 24 plus years ago after realizing that small businesses desperately needed a press release service that they could actually afford, giving them access to the media and the national newswire, all with a personal touch. He holds an MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry from George Mason University. And his press releases have resulted in articles being published in the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Bloomberg, and many more prestigious outlets. Mickie Kennedy, welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, can we just start with press releases? I want to get to your company and what you do, but sometimes it's just nice for people to kind of get a sense of like, what in the world are we talking about before we even understand what you do with it? When does it make sense to write and distribute a press release for a business?
So I think it makes sense when you have like a major event in the company. Could be a new product, could be, let's say you have a new CEO or president. It could be, just something that's significant to you. It could also be things that you make significant. For example, you could choose to do an industry survey or study and take those results and share them with the media through a press release. At the end of the day, a press release is just an announcement to the media, usually written in the third person. They're not very sexy. It's not elevated writing. It's usually just the facts. You're looking for the journalist to turn that into an article, but you want to make sure you have all of the information they need to turn that into an article.
Mm. When does an industry survey, for example, since you brought that one up, when does that when does it make news? How significant does it need to be?
Right. So you really want to ask questions that are really important or trending right now. For example, there's some economic uncertainty. We're, a year plus out of a pandemic. There's people who, haven't transitioned to working back in the office. So, are these things that are happening in your industry? Are you having trouble hiring, or are you facing the potential of layoffs as your budgets are being contained and you're in saving money mode. So anything that you're going through potentially could be fodder to ask questions in your industry. Really, the media likes to have an industry's temperature taken time and time again. So you can have surveys get picked up routinely. You could ask the same questions and it'd be as significant today as it is a year from now, because people's responses are going to be different because of the changes that they're going through. So I think that, if you can come up with really intriguing questions that are really relevant today, you're not looking for evergreen questions that are, always going to be the same. You're looking for the types of things that ebb and flow. So they tend to go around, the economics, strength of a company. Are you planning to spend more or less in marketing over the next 2 quarters? Have you stopped hiring? Do you have a hiring freeze in place, or are you actively hiring? Are you finding it difficult, to build a company culture that includes people working from home? All kinds of things like that, I think could really be relevant. And also, if there's other things that are specific to your industry in particular, you definitely want to make sure you incorporate that. If, think of things that if you were going to a trade show or a conference, that you would ask another colleague, like, hey, have you noticed that it seems that everybody who's supposed to be paying net 30 is now taking 60 to 90 days to pay? Well, if they share that with you, then that could be signs of a trend, that there's some, tightening of budgets and, capital problems with other companies. And so those are all things that are really relevant. You then put together the survey. I usually tell people to try to strive for 16 great questions. You can put weird questions towards the end of it. I like 4 questions per page, 4 pages through like SurveyMonkey. So that way, if someone stops halfway, you've still got 8 of the responses. And as you've weighted the survey, you've gotten the most important questions answered, and left those, less serious ones as you go. But you will be surprised. I mean, some of the responses are going to be so interesting that you may take question 15 and feel like, I didn't think this was going to go anywhere, but wow, this is a really intriguing response. And you're going to ask colleagues, ask your coworkers, why do you think this trended this way? This was really surprising. And you're going to put together some analysis. So the survey usually focuses on 2 or 4 questions, doesn't usually focus on all 16. But that being said, you want to build a page on your website where you go have all the results from the survey. Journalists love that data. So they'll use that if they want to beef up their story or find a different angle or a different hook based on the responses that you have. And you're going to have your analysis, a quote by you as to why you felt this particular question skewed a particular way. And that sort of just anchors you as the expert. And this works well for anybody. You don't have to be a big shot company. You don't have to be recognized in your industry to basically declare yourself an expert and get this out there. And by doing this, you will become an expert. I have clients who routinely do surveys and they're known for it now. And they're considered experts in an industry, and people reach out to them. They get asked to speak at conferences and things like that. All of that because of that authority that they built themselves. They sent that out. And the thing about surveys and studies is, in my experience, when you ask the right questions, you generally get between 8 and 14 articles written based on a single press release. The least I've seen is like 4. And that's usually because the industry is very small. So there's only a handful of publications and websites to actually run it. But it is a great way that if you feel like you don't have anything important going on, that you can make something important by, basically making the news.
Uh, part of what I love about what you're just now talking about is I think that one of the things that we care about, this is the Voice of Influence podcast. I mean, we care about getting the message to people. And so part of what you're talking about here is like that the press release can actually amplify that message in such a really significant way.
Absolutely. I mean, the things that can be done with a press release are just, multi-dimensional. You know, when you do get media pickup, um, you know, you can share it with your leads, you can share it with your customers, you can share it with your social media. You can also do the same thing with a press release. So even if you don't get the pickup that you were looking for, you can still share that news. And the thing that happens when you do get media pickup, an article about you, is generally people who get customers through these articles, they generally convert very highly because they read this article. It came across as sort of like a third party corroboration or endorsement of you. When a journalist chooses to write about you, that's sort of like the social proof, adding credibility to you. And that credibility can be conveyed to your leads. So, the people that are always on the fence and probably not going to, you're not going to win over. So you're going to lose them. Potentially, you can bring some of those to your side and convert them into customers. And the same thing with customers. A lot of people don't think about marketing to their customers and, conveying credibility and indicators that they are, doing well. Because it's just like they're our customers. They're not going to leave us, but everybody shops around. Everybody wonders, am I really using the right company for this? And if they read an article about you, they're going to feel like, wow, I am with the right company. No need to shop around this year or reconsider moving to someone else. They are really, rocking and being recognized for being really great. And so I think that those are important things to do, that getting media pickup, we call it earned media in the industry,
Yeah.
is really a great, powerful asset. And it's something that, you want to, build into your marketing channels, your social media channels, as well as, preserve them for future, putting on your website, screenshots of articles and things like that, because they do sometimes disappear. It's not unusual for a company to completely change the way that they produce news and archive it, and they might just do a big purge of past content. So you want to make sure that you've archived it either through screenshots, PDFs, things like that, so that you can sort of still convey that over time and build a real asset. I have one client who is offline, and he did really well in trade publications. They were in the carpet industry. And I kept pointing out, I know we're targeting the carpet industry, but customers are not reading these publications, just other carpet companies. And they said, we know what we're doing. And so after a while, they got about 30 articles picked up. Um, I'd say about half of them, or a little more than half, were trade publications. They got some newspapers, including local newspapers in New Jersey Magazine, where they were located. And they revealed to me that they had put together this brag book of all these clippings. And when they go and give someone a quote in their house for carpet, they say, someone may come in a little bit more than us, but, we're really respected. Here we are in Floor Trade Weekly. Here we are in New Jersey Magazine. Here we are in the local paper. We're recognized. We're not a fly by night company. We're not someone who just uses pickup labor. All of our people are salaried. Many of them have been here 20 years. And so it really makes you feel like, again, you're choosing the right company. And if it requires you to spend $300 or $400 more, you're more likely to just do that. As a result, they started converting, close to 17% more of these consultations where they give a quote, and just by having this brag book.
Yeah, that is incredible. And they're probably not they were in these industry magazines, not necessarily looking to sell across the country, but because they were nationally recognized or industry recognized, they were able to pull that back in. I love that. What makes a press release strategic versus don't bother throwing it out there?
Right. So I think that at the end of the day, you have to realize that you have an agenda, and that's usually to get more sales and to bring recognition to your company. And a journalist, their job is to gatekeep and determine what rises to the level that I want to share with my protected audience. And sometimes they don't overlap. Many times they don't. I see a lot of these Me Too press releases where it's like everything's stacked as to we want to sell, we want to build, but there's not an interesting story. And you have to recognize that a journalist is a story builder. Most articles are written with a arc format, like a story format. And so if you have a product launch press release and all it is here's our product, here's why it's the best, and here's a list of features, it's very hard for a journalist to build an article with that. But if you have a use case study in addition to that, where you talk about company X used this product over the summer, they saw a 22% increase in sales or revenue or some metric, and here's a quote by them talking about how great the product is. That's easy to build a story, and it really helps fulfill the journalist need to have that story arc. And so when you sort of like reverse engineer what you're announcing, or try to think of it from the standpoint of a journalist protecting their biggest asset, their audience, you really want to try to give them something that they will find irresistible and want to share with their audience. And there are ways of tweaking what you may have wanted to initially do to better fulfill that. And in addition to that, there are ways in which you can come up with things that are just really relevant for the media. We mentioned the survey study, but also data in general. Journalists love numbers and data. So if you have, a, 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 a mid-grade press release, but you introduce it by talking about trends in your industry, that like 78% of people in your industry are facing this issue, and this is how you attempt to solve it. That in and of itself is like, wow, that completely creates something that I can work with. I can build a story from a journalist standpoint.
Mm, good, good, good. What is eReleases, you and your company finding as trending, or things that journalists are actually looking for besides the things that you already just mentioned? Is there anything specific to this particular time?
I think right now, journalists are looking for things that are a little bit unique or different. Sometimes it can be, your story of how the product came to be, or the service, or the company. A lot of people really discount their launch story. And what you have to realize is that startups use these all the time. If you ever watch Shark Tank, one of the first things they do is they say, hi, this is me. This is Bill, my partner. And, this is how this came to be. And I think the reason people, identify with that is it personalizes and humanizes you. And I've coached clients to do that, sometimes sharing embarrassing stories or obstacles that they've overcome. in a
Even in
press
a press
release,
release.
even in a press release to help build out the company. It's
Huh.
usually not the lead, but
Uh-huh.
it is something that you talk about, a boilerplate or about section, share some things that really make you unique. You have to remember that, eBay, when they first launched, they all had the story going out that the founder created it so that their partner could sell their Pez dispenser collection. And it was completely falsified by a PR firm, but for 10 years, it worked really well. It's like, oh, there's this new auction platform, and this is the story of how it came to be. It wasn't the lead, but it was always mentioned in almost all the articles that were out there. And, one client that I coached had an embarrassing story. It wasn't tragic or anything, but it was just slightly embarrassing and kind of humorous. And it was the lead that Inc. magazine used to write about them in an article. And so don't discount what makes you unique. Sometimes it's, what makes you unique is your unique selling proposition, what you do different than everybody else in the marketplace. And I do challenge customers who feel like they don't have a unique selling proposition to consider building one and creating a moat around it. And by that, what I mean is do something different than everybody else. And, for some people, you may already be doing something you're not even aware of. I had one client who says, we're just a reseller like everybody else. There's, hundreds of us in the industry across the US. And I'm like, but there's got to be something you do. And you're like, not really. And I was like, well, why do people come back to you? Oh, well, we have this big library of tutorials, and it shows all the different aspects of the software and how to use it and how to build it out. And it's like, well, that's a USP. You should lead with that. And, that makes you much more likely to convert someone than just going to someone else if you're pretty reasonably priced. And so you don't want to ever compete solely on price, because eventually you will lose. And, so that's why people are always out there trying to, create something that's a little bit different. With Amazon, it's the fast shipping. And, Walmart, it's like, pull up and they'll load your car. And so all of these people are trying to make little tweaks and make things a little bit more different. And you should consider that as well. So anything that's unique, from your story to your product or service, you want to build that into the press release. Doesn't necessarily have to be the focus of the press release, but it should be included within it, especially in the boilerplate section. And that's usually towards the end of the release. There's about company, and it goes into a an elevator pitch, just a very succinct few sentences about what you are all about.
Okay. So you have shared so much wisdom about press releases. Tell us what your company does with
Right.
press releases.
Right. So eReleases is a press release distribution platform. We launched originally by just being a matchmaker, sending press releases to relevant journalists by email. And more than 10 years ago, PR Newswire reached out to us and said, hey, you should also send releases through us. And I felt like it wasn't going to work because they were charging $1,200 to $1,500 to move like a 600-word press release nationally over the wire. But they liked our audience. They realized that their salespeople would never reach out to small businesses who are doing 3 or 4 releases a year, with budgets that are much smaller than, Ford or major corporations. So they were able to come up with pricing that worked for us and build a custom national distribution, sort of a win-win. And I sort of feel like we're a cooperative of small businesses. And, by representing so many and moving 12 to 14,000 releases a year, we're able to leverage a really good price with them. And so people are paying, usually, about a third of what they would if they went directly to the wire.
I heard you tell a story about this, about how you got in there. It seems like it had something, you were thinking outside the box. Could you tell about that? Do you know what I'm talking about? About nighttime or something?
Yes, yes. So when we were looking to try to figure out how to work, they brought me in and showed me their newsroom, and they mentioned that they had a couple of people that were working in the newsroom overnight. So the newsroom's, excuse me, is 24 hours. And so light bulb went off because they said they're not very busy overnight. And I was like, what if we set up our releases for next day rather than immediate distribution? And so during the downtime, which is considerable for the overnight crew, they could set up our releases for the next business morning, and it wouldn't cost them additional labor. There'd be no additional labor handling e-releases, press releases. So that's why if you ever use e-releases, the default is next business day for distribution, but you can still schedule it at any time out in the future, or for an additional fee, have it go out immediate as well.
Sure, sure. I just think that's brilliant. I mean, you you have this creative side to you, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got this whole poetry thing, and then you're also this business owner that's getting stuff done, right? I was wondering how those two kind of interplay for you just as a business owner, as a human being.
Right.
How do you satisfy both sides of yourself? Because obviously that creative side is kind of probably how you're seeing those other opportunities.
Right. So the creative side is the one that goes in and looks at what's working out of those 12 to 14,000 releases we do each year, and tries to see patterns and see if they'll work with other clients. I had mentioned the survey or study. I didn't come up with that. I saw that a few of my clients were using surveys and studies routinely. And one company, Clutch, was using as many as 30 surveys a year for a lot of different micro verticals, and doing very well with it, often getting 8 to 14 articles for every press release they were doing. And that gave me the idea of, seeing if this will work with others. And it has. And so I feel like that's where my creative energy goes in the business, is in education and finding out what's working and conveying that to my clients. I built a free video masterclass that just goes through strategies that are working currently, and it's free for anybody. I'm hoping to get my customers to do it, but it's hard to get these people to all go and get this education. But if anyone's interested, it's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN, and it's completely free. It's less than an hour video masterclass. It's a great place for anybody who's never tried PR or considering it, to sort of do an audit of themselves with these strategic types of press releases and see if any of them align with things that you could potentially do, so that if you do build out a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases, you're doing the ones that are more likely to have results. And that's one of the challenges of PR, is that when you have a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases, it might only be 3 or 4 releases that hit traction or do really well. But despite that, you can have one press release that just generates a huge amount of buzz for you. It can create crazy amount of sales. We had during the pandemic someone who was with a small PR firm, was part of a project to help restaurants that were closed down during the pandemic. It's called the Dining Bond Initiative. And we did a press release for them. It would have normally cost like $400, but I did it, for free, just to help out the effort. And it got over 150 articles. Wall Street Journal, all the major publications, New York Times picked it up, as well as a lot of small newspapers nationwide. And it also got global pickup as well. It ended up generating in excess of $10 million in revenue that immediately went to help small businesses that were, restaurants in particular, that were closed during the pandemic, and all from, a $400 press release. So that is the wild extreme side of potentially what could happen, but it's the leverage. When you go over a wire, you have the leverage to reach a lot of people. And if your news is really newsworthy, or just hits at the right exact time, you can have lots of people picking it up and running with it. And so it's really phenomenal to see that work, especially for, a grassroots effort.
Mm. So if somebody was interested in working with your company, what do they do? How does that process work?
Right. So basically, you would just reach out to us at eReleases.com. We have chat, we have email, phones, of course. We have no salespeople, so you'd only speak to an editor. There's no commissions or anything like that. We basically will, share what we've seen work and not work. We do recognize that a lot of people don't know how PR works, so we're really good at hand holding and walking people through the process. We do offer writing services, but I do challenge people to consider writing a press release themselves, just looking at one of the templates or press release samples on our website and giving it a try. You can send it to us and just ask what we think before you've done a release, even if you choose not to work with us. It's just a courtesy that we will offer to anybody. We're just very much trying to be helpful, but do allow us a couple business days to get back to you. And, uh, then you just schedule the release through our platform, and it would go out, and you'd get reports and stuff like that sent through email, and hopefully it makes a difference. Often it may not. So you take what didn't work and you learn from it, but using a core of strategic types of press releases that you could be doing, you hone on what potentially will work. And I've had clients who just have come in and said, I've tried everything. And I'm like, well, let's try a survey, or let's try, one of the things I like is researching your industry for blind spots or gaps. What are the things not being talked about in your industry that, but should be? And we've had that work really well. Sometimes being able to repeat it again and again. That was what the carpet company did. They talked about their biggest enemy being the big box home improvement stores, and it was sort of a David versus Goliath. And they just shared how they market against the home improvement stores and compete against them, to convert the sales that they need to for local customers. And it's really easy to compete against the big box home improvement stores, they say, because they do such a terrible job. Many of the big box home improvement stores don't even call on people who are carpet installers. They just call people on a list of who are licensed home improvement people in their state. And as long as they've got that licensing, that's all they care about. They just say, hey, are you available to install carpet tomorrow? They may have never installed carpet before. They may have never done patching along seams. And the end result is usually not as good as going through a professional local carpet company.
Hmm. So, Mickie, how has your particular role evolved over the years? Because you've been in business for a long time. So I would imagine that you've learned a lot, grown a lot, changed a lot about what you do. Do you mind sharing that?
Sure. So it'll be 25 years this October that we've been in business. It's been forever. We've been through ups and downs and tried lots of different things. I was a micromanager for the biggest part of the business. In 2015, I walked away and focused more on the marketing and the education, and allowed my staff to not be micromanaged. I Average turnover at the time was a year. Most people would cycle in and cycle out. And I had a friend who was an HR consultant come in, interview the staff, interview my customers, and interview me, and look at the job postings and said, my staff was completely fine. It was me. And they just felt like they could never do anything right, and that you were constantly behind their back, diminishing everything that they did and telling them how it could be better. And rather than
Mm,
building them up, I was dragging them down. And I just realized that it's just being an entrepreneur, being a perfectionist, that is my curse, and I'm not going to fix it. So I fixed it by getting out of there and putting someone in place that was more of a maternal figure who builds them up while also doling out, rules and making sure that they're adhering to certain processes and things like that. And, most of the people that were there at the time in 2015 are still there to this day. So we've solved the turnover problem. And unfortunately, it was me, but I found it very refreshing because by allowing me to focus on the marketing and the strategic parts of the business has been able to grow much more at a much faster pace, and provide more value to customers. So I can do more education, more podcasts like
mm,
this.
mm. What so eventually you felt that way. Did you feel that way initially, or was there any bit of you that was like, "Ugh, oh, this
Well,
really does not feel good?"
it didn't feel great, but I immediately accepted what she said. I didn't try
Okay.
to challenge her or anything. And the
Yeah.
thing is, I'm a poet. I went to grad school for poetry and just sort of fell into a startup as employee number 3. And they said, you have the writing background, figure out press releases. And I did. And I felt like I could do this online. And that's, how eReleases came to be. But it wasn't easy. And it was one of these things I think that allowed me to do so well initially, is that I'm a micromanager. And it's great if you're just micromanaging yourself. But once you start micromanaging other people, it just becomes terrible. But, during my process of building out the business, I was doing crazy stuff. I would create a Google ad. And after a day, if it didn't have sales, I would say, that's a loser. And I bumped into a marketing class that was about AdWords and took it and learned stuff like statistical relevance. You have to have an ad that has enough clicks and enough conversions to see if it's going to convert more or less than another page. A/B split testing sort of transformed my life. And I started approaching so many things like that in my business where, you know, I had one client, I would send these shock and awe packages of really just great stuff. It excited me. I loved it. It was like crab chips, a raven, all kinds of Baltimore things because we were close to Baltimore, Maryland, and we still are. And I thought it was amazing. And I had one person come back and said they thought it was a little um, less than professional and a little too whimsical. And so rather than get mad or offended, I just said, let's split test it. So half of my new customers got that, and the other half just got a book with a welcome letter. And we started looking at the lifetime value of those two different properties. And at 6 months, it looked like, wow, 50% improvement in the lifetime value of the people who just received the book. And then we looked at it a year and 2 years and then 3 years. And at 3 year mark, the lifetime value of the people who received the book was three times what the people that received this package. And the package was $60 worth of stuff. And the book was just like $8. And I just felt like, wow, but there was something to it. It just showed me that, for my audience of other businesses and entrepreneurs, they don't appreciate the whimsy. They don't appreciate the poet side of me. So you got to
Mm,
be a little more professional. And
mm.
so, I've just learned over time to just take what the evidence shows me. And so when the HR consultant came back and said, you're the problem, I just took it at face value and got out of the office and solved it. And it did. It really did.
I think that's really admirable because I think a lot of people, especially creative people who start businesses, tend to get really precious about their art, precious about their, like, this is me. I have to express myself through my business. And that can turn into what you were talking about, like people not having respect for it or whatever it might be. And it's hard to accept that. But then your ability to say, I guess you just made the choice. It's more important to keep going and succeed than it is to express myself through this gift that I'm giving everybody. Um, yeah, I think that that's a really important lesson for a lot of people. Like, we need to check our ego at the door a little bit and allow ourselves to express ourselves in other ways. So you've got a lot of beautiful art behind you um in the picture here, but how do you find ways to express yourself so that you can keep the business more professional?
I think for me, it's balancing the poetry. I've been writing a lot over the past 5 or 6 years. I feel like my poetry's never been better. I've finished one book, but it hasn't been published yet. I'm still trying to find a publisher for it because there's a lot more poets than there are publishers.
Hmm.
And I'm sort of coming into almost finishing my second book. And I find that really rewarding, working on poems and editing and things like that. But I also get really excited by finding trends that are working in PR. And so I just look for the creativity and the spaces that are there and just try to, incorporate that into my education and convey that to my clients as well.
Mm. Got one more question for you. This is the Voice of Influence podcast. What last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
I think to avoid the imposter syndrome. I think that a lot of people, when they're asked about PR, just feel like they're not important enough. And a lot of people who are even considering PR don't feel they're important enough to do a survey or study. So many things are you choosing to be the voice, the influence, and just go out there and claim it and incorporate that. You are important. You are doing something that's different. If you feel that you're truly not, then make it so. Make little changes, little tweaks, little things. For me, the education part came very slowly, but it's something that I felt really strongly about. And I'm now a big advocate about just educating people on trends that are working in PR.
Well, thank you so much. I know you mentioned an an opportunity to watch a master class. Could you reiterate that again? Could you share that
Sure.
again and how people can get a hold of you or your
Sure.
company?
It's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN, completely free, less than an hour. It'll really allow you to do an audit of your business using strategic types of press releases that are working to see if those could potentially work for you. And, our website's eReleases.com. I mentioned we had chat, phone calls, emails. Feel free to reach out with us in any of those ways. All of our social media is on the lower right of that page, including my personal LinkedIn.
All right. Well, it was great to have you here on the Voice of Influence podcast, Mickie.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.